All right, so I'll turn this off. Requests for stories of um, playing music with my guru or being with my guru or anything, um, which I don't talk about, but I often think, which is true, I don't talk about too much, but I always think like I'd like to get so and so, one of my guru buys or someone else who knew my guru on to tell their stories. And once I did, because I had Jay on here and I asked Jay, hey, can you tell some story? But he didn't. So I probably should. Um, let's see. I mean, I don't have a particular story in mind, but I was extremely fortunate because my guru was a musical genius, and he um, was immersed in music his entire life. Certainly, I mean, he was a professional dancer. I actually just found this out. If you go, I just kind of rebuilt this or filled out this page on the site bansuri-bliss.com/Vijay-Raghav-Rao, and I added, there's a picture that has a bio. Someone found me and sent it to me from some event of his in 1992, and it said who his dance teacher was, who I did not know, and I looked that up. His dance teacher was a famous Bharatanatyam teacher. I don't know how long he did dance, but the dancers in Indian classical dance have very good sense of rhythm, using the same rhythms that we do. Anyway, then he started learning from Ravi Shankar in 1945 when he was age 20, and he conducted the National Symphony on Independence Day of India in 1947 at the Red Fort, which I thought was pretty amazing because he was 22 years old. And then he collaborated with Ravi Shankar for 30 years and was head of All India Radio music department for films in All India Radio. I don't know how big it is these days, but All India Radio was huge for decades. And I used to buy these CDs that would get sold, T-Series All India Radio. They'd sell for like $2.99, and they'd have all these recordings from All India Radio of all these famous musicians who used to go to the studio and play. So I'm sure that he was, always meeting and playing with tons of amazing musicians. And anyway, so he was, he's far beyond my capabilities when it comes to music, and was a very good person too, just hanging out at his house, reverence for the music, never said anything bad about anybody, and he did not have many students. He was not very, he didn't have a website and a Facebook page and YouTube channel and all these things that I have, and it was never his goal, really. He only cared about playing music and making music. And so he was somewhat unknown, relatively, not unknown, but for his skill level, he was not he's somewhat obscure Indian classical musician because he was never, doing any kind of mass marketing or anything like that. And that part of that was probably benefited me because he did not have many students, and that meant he had some time for me. And so I always made it my philosophy, and this was in the days before there was any internet knowledge of there was no Indian classical music knowledge available on the internet. I studied with him from 1999 to 2008, and I made it my goal to always take as many lessons as he would give me if I were in a place where, if I would be traveling a lot. Sometimes I'd leave the country and but if I was in America, which is where he was when I learned from him, he'd spend about half the year each year in America in either Virginia or California. I'd make it my goal to be there every time that he would say, yes, come. And that was not as much as I'd like, but usually once a week for an hour or hour 15 maybe, sometimes twice a week. That was pretty rare. And if I was taking classes twice a week, I would definitely not be able to keep up with all that he was teaching me. So yeah, he would usually sing. He usually would not play his flute. He did sometimes, but usually he'd just sit there and sing. He could sing a lot better than me, so he could sing just as well as he could play the flute. And flute is the vocal music, pretty precisely the same as the vocal music, the Gayaki Ung. And yeah, he would sometimes he'd have music written out, like he'd usually have a drawer. He'd sit on the couch, I'd sit on the floor, and he'd usually have a drawer right there, and there'd be some papers of music in there. I don't know if they were old or if he had just composed them that day or what, but he'd pull something out sometimes, and sometimes put it in front of my face and tell me to play it, or sometimes he would just come up with stuff on the spot, and either he would write it down or I would write it down and try to play it back. And usually do a different raga every week. He'd sometimes say we're going to do a raga for weeks, but then it would usually just change to a different raga. I would sometimes request a raga or a composition. I'd usually try to learn some of his compositions that I would listen to on recordings. I always liked learning those because I'd have the recordings to listen to. And I don't know what else to say. I always felt very fortunate, like to have learned from him was the best that I could hope for, musically speaking. And I'm fortunate to have I have some recordings of him teaching, and I have a lot of recordings of him playing. I've never thought that the recordings of him playing were very good sound quality. I don't know who the engineers were or what, but there's usually like echoey tabla, and the tambura's it's just not high sound quality, unfortunately, but a lot of those compositions that I teach and play are there and, good enough to enjoy and learn from. And I don't know, he'd probably be maybe a little surprised if he knew how many students I have, because when he was alive, I don't think I had any students. Maybe just occasionally give someone a little bit of knowledge about the flute, but I was not trying to find students, and there wasn't really internet as we know it. I guess in 2008 I learned how to build websites, but I was not focused on teaching music at that point in my life, and it probably was not any goal. It was never a goal of mine to be a professional musician. I just wanted to be able to play the raga. I wanted to be able to play the flute really well, and I wanted to be able to play Indian classical music. That was always my goal, just play music as well as I could play. And I saw him perform at one concert I have a recording of, fortunately, from 2002. I'll try to get that online. And that's all I can think of at the moment. If I think of other stuff, then I certainly will. He had a couple other students. Well, he has two famous students, G.S. Sachdev and Ronu Mazumdar. Ronu is still alive and plays all the time. I've never met or talked to Ronu. G.S. Sachdev I met one time. And then he also had two main students who would come when I learned from him. One who would come regularly, that's Arun Bagal, whose son Ashish I would play tabla with regularly. And Arun, I saw the last time about 8 months ago. I actually wrote up like another unfinished book. I was creating a short ebook called, I think it's called 617 Pages of Musical Gold. And that was in part about my last experience visiting Arun, who studied with Guru G, as he would like to be called, or as we did call him, from maybe 1991 until I guess 2008. He had well, not Arun. Arun is still alive. VJG had a stroke in 2008, so that was the last he gave lessons. And Arun would come probably every week as well, so I'd join in on those lessons if he was there. And then there was one other flute player, Pradeep Kaladkar. I don't know if he's still around. I haven't spoken to him, and I don't know how to contact him. I guess I could look him up. 15 years probably. He would drive down from Delaware about 3 hours. Arun would drive probably an hour and a half. So yeah, another thing that I think modern day flute players like you all don't understand is how easy it is to learn. Like, you're not in person, but most of the knowledge that I want to transmit, I can transmit through the internet, and all you have to do is log in. I used to, it wasn't that hard. Well, I'd fly across the country to be, I never wanted to be in either of the two places that he taught me. They were not my favorite places in the world to be. I'd pretty much be there to take lessons, and I certainly flew across the country several times to take lessons. And when I did take a lesson, I would have to drive to the lesson in traffic and, 35 minutes maybe. Not too bad. But Arun would drive an hour and a half each way. Pradeep would drive about 3 hours each way. So that's probably why Pradeep didn't come too often. But yeah, it was always my goal was get as many lessons from him while he was alive as possible. Because when I started learning from him, he was 75. So I knew he wouldn't be around forever. So, and still my goal is if you ever have access to a good teacher, good meaning you resonate with them, you get along with them, you like their teaching, you learn from them, then you should take advantage of it, because no teacher's around forever. Even if they're around, it doesn't mean they're available or that you're available. Things get busy, who knows what. But all the lessons you ever learn, assuming that you take good notes, which I always did, I'd always take notes at the class. His handwriting was very difficult to read. I would come home and I'd sit there with a pen and paper in the days before Adobe Illustrator, or in the days before I knew how to use it or knew that it was the proper solution to write Indian music. I would sit there with a pen and paper, try not to get any mistakes on the page, and write it all out so that I'd have that music forever, hopefully. And I always did a good job of archiving it and keeping it safe in case it got lost. I used to go to the Kinko's copy center and put my pages on the Xerox machine and copy them 4 to a page, all of them, and then I'd print those and copy those 4 to a page, or something like that, so I could get 16 to a page, so that when I used to travel, I'd have a stack of papers with me, versus having to take a whole couple notebooks. And then I didn't have iTubla Pro. I'd have a big box like you still see sometimes, a Shruti box that was this big, and then a Tubla box that was that big, and they weighed 5, 6, 7 pounds, and you'd actually have to tune the tambura knobs on it. So you all have a much different experience, and I think that's all I can say, other than I try to convey the music. I mean, I certainly teach certain things in ways that he didn't teach me, but overall I stay quite true to the music that he taught me when I deliver it to you. So that's my story for now. I do try to get some of his other students on here. There are a couple, I will re-invite them to join us, and maybe they'll say a few things. All right. Let's go ahead and end on this note. Saw. And that note. All right. Thanks for being here.